All right, so today is the lecture on culture, and as you can see a description on the board, the word culture comes from the Latin root agriculture, and it means to cultivate. It's an easy way to remember how we pass down traditions from one generation to the next. There are two different types of or taxonomies of culture, as you also can see on the notes. The two main divisions are what are said to be a high context culture and a low context culture. A high context culture is a type of society or a group of people that have been around for a long time. They have long standing traditions, and these are difficult to change because they have gotten used to do what they do over and over and over and over again. It is exactly the opposite for a low context culture where it's a newer type of society or organization that, because they haven't been around for such a long time, they are continuously trying to set up a way, trying to set up the rules. You have heard, for example, that the United States is a newer country or culture, and that is in comparison to, say, Mexico or India or China, which have been around for a very long time. The Canada can be said to be a newer type of culture. When you see these taxonomies, and the word taxonomy basically means classifications. When you see the different categories or characteristics of a culture, then you know that you are either on a high context or a low context culture. And why is that important to know? Because you can read what people are like within reason, what people are like and how they behave and the reasons why they do. In this case, if you are in a high context culture, they are bound to be polychronic, collectivistic, masculine, high power distance, and low avoidance of uncertainty. And the opposite is true for a low context culture. In this way, a society or group of people that are even an organization, a business that is polychronic, they what it means is that the word poly comes from the Greek and it means several or many, and the word chronos means time, and it's a reference to different perceptions of time. Meaning that if you in Mexico, for example, or in Spain or in Italy, you know that people are very lenient with time. They're not forever in a rush like we are. We live in a monochronic society, which is mono means one, it comes from the Greek, and chronos means time, one perception of time. Therefore, here in the US, for example, we're always bound by our schedules and how we like to plan ahead of time, and we're structured. Not that this society is not structured, it's just that they're structured in a different way. They're very relaxed about the way they use time. Then this type of society is collectivistic, meaning that people work for the benefit of the group rather than the individual. In the United States, we like to promote individual success. Neither one is, say, right or better. It's just a cultural difference for which people behave differently, right? In Mexico, for example, I was born in Mexico, and I grew up in Mexico. When people get married, they don't move away. They add a room to the house, and the family grows. In an individualistic society, like in the United States, for example, not to generalize or stereotype, but we tend to want for our kids to go out in the world and experience life so that they can be successful on their own. It's a different way of looking at life. People who live in a masculine society live in a type of organization or a type of society where gender roles are very formal, meaning that unlike a feminine society where gender roles, we say that are in this type of society, we say, for example, that men and women have the exact same rights, and that they are. We try to promote equality between the genders, basically. In this type of society, men seem to have the upper hand. Think about countries like I have spoken about China, for example. You know that for the longest time they had a not necessarily a law, but it was a rule that people or couples could only have one child. And then, if you have heard, for example, there's a stigma for which we think of the Chinese as wanting to have so they have only one child, and that child generally typically is a male because one of the ideas is that they will carry on the family name. You have heard, for example, that there have been many challenges with women in China. If children are born a female, then in many instances they're given up for adoption, right? Again, not to stereotype or to make statements that are not universal truths, but it seems to be a trend, right? In Mexico, it's definitely a masculine type of society where gender roles are very specific, and that means, for example, that women are the keeper of the house and men go out and work, right? Obviously, societies have changed and are changing rapidly all over the world, but here in the United States, we don't battle that so much. Men and women go out to work and they provide equally to the home. In a low power distance society, which belongs in a low context culture, it's in reference to how the economics within the country or within the society are more at an equal footing, meaning that we have more of an equal distribution of wealth within the country. Here in the United States, for example, although a lot of people complain that there are too many people that are poor and that there are too many people that are wealthy, the truth is that if we were to compare to, say, Mexico or China or even Venezuela, their people are very, very, very poor, and they belong in a high power distance because, in a nutshell, it means that in a high power distance, for example, there are very few people that are at the top, but those people are beyond your imagination wealthy. And the rest of the population are pretty poor. The middle class society is pretty small. In the US, yes, we have very many people that are wealthy, but we also have a very large middle class. And the people that are poor in the US, there are many, but in comparison, it's not as much. This week, I just found out that people in Venezuela, for example, the minimum wage is $47 a month. In Mexico, the minimum wage for the day is something like $7. I won't tell you how much I earn for an hour, but is more than people earn in Venezuela for a month in an hour. And so then we have a high power distribution in terms of there are very wealthy people. There are very few, but they're extremely wealthy, and the rest of the population are sort of at the bottom, right? Then in this type of the middle class society it's very small. It's almost non-existent. And in this type of society, there are plenty of people that are wealthy. There are plenty of people that are middle class, and the lower class. Yes, there are way too many. We wouldn't want to have any, but in comparison, it's not anywhere near. And finally, there is a high avoidance of uncertainty in a low context culture versus a high context culture. There is low avoidance of uncertainty, and that means that because of the way people grow up and the way people behave, then they become accustomed to, say, roll with the punches or be flexible or not to freak out with the way life is, versus in the United States where we like for life to be structured and we like for things to be specific and clear. We don't like ambiguity. So with that in mind, one of the things that I believe I want to reinforce is that in a high context culture, people actually prefer to communicate, or they don't mind communicating with nonverbal communication, so that the way they dress, the way they walk, how they behave in public, they're good at reading messages that way, versus here in the United States, for example, in which we have a high avoidance of uncertainty. We don't like ambiguity. We like for things to be clear, straight, and to the point.